So today we're going to be talking about the properties of numbers. Before I go to the next slide, I'm just going to warn you, it may look a little daunting at first, but I am going to tell you that it makes each of the properties are common sense. I'm just putting a name to what the property is. So, as you can see, we have a lot of properties that we're going to be talking about in this lesson. We have the reflexive property, the transitive property, symmetric property, substitution property, additive identity, additive inverse, multiplicative identity, multiplicative property of 0, multiplicative inverse, the commutative property, and the associative property. There are a couple of properties that can be grouped together. So, for example, the additive identity and the additive inverse. These deal with addition. Of course. The next one's the multiplicative identity, the multiplicative property is 0, the multiplicative inverse. All three of these deal with multiplication. The commutative and the associative property. These two properties are properties that you solely need to focus on. This is going to be what the Terra Nova and what other tests are going to be talking about, and you really need to focus on these properties. The reflexive, transitive, symmetric, and substitution property. These all focus on equality. Alright, the reflexive property is pretty simple. Any quantity is equal to itself. For example, 5 is equal to 5. 17 is equal to 17. 4 plus 3 is equal to 4 plus 3. The reflexive property basically means the number is equal to itself. Alright, so the symmetric property is a little odd, but it basically states if A equals B, then B equals A. So if the first quantity equals the second quantity, then the second quantity equals the first quantity. So, for example, if 8 is equal to 2 plus 6, then 2 plus 6 is equal to 8. Another example is if 4 is equal to 3 plus 1, then 3 plus 1 is equal to 4. Basically, what you're doing is you are flipping one number to the other side. So the transitive property is kind of like the symmetric property, except there are 3 expressions instead of 2 expressions. The transitive property basically states if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. So for example, if A, let's say that A is equal to 2 plus 2, and B is equal to 3 plus 1, and C is equal to 4. So if we have A is equal to B, that basically means 2 plus 2 is equal to 3 plus 1, which it does, because 2 plus 2 is 4, 3 plus 1 is 4. And if B is equal to C, which 3 plus 1 is equal to 4, then we must have our A, which is 2 plus 2, and our C, which is 4, then A must equal C, which we have 2 plus 2, and that must be equal to 4. So the transitive property, this is basically, it's showing different equivalent expressions between 3 expressions. So the substitution property deals with variables. So, for example, if we have n is equal to 11, then if we have 4n, what is 4n equal to? So what we are wanting to do is we are wanting to substitute this 11 in for n. So all that we will have to do is 4n is equal to 4 times 11. So if n is equal to 11, all we have to do is substitute the n in, or we have to substitute 11 in for n, then we'll have 4n is equal to 4 times 11. So when we're talking about the additive identity, we are going to want to ask ourselves a question. So what plus a number is always going to equal that number? So what plus 2 is always going to equal 2? 2 plus what equals 2? That answer is going to be 0. So the additive identity is you take any number and you add 0 to it, you're always going to get that number. So 4 plus 0 is equal to 4. 18 plus 0 is equal to 18. 5,480 plus 0 is equal to 5,480. The additive identity is basically any number plus 0 is equal to that number. So when we're talking about additive inverse, we are talking about the opposite of a number. So when you add any number and its opposite, they're always going to equal 0. So what I mean by an opposite is if we have 2, the opposite of that is going to be negative 2. So 2 plus negative 2 is 0. Another example is 8. The opposite of that is negative 8. That's always going to equal to 0. And we can even do a negative 7. Negative 7 plus the opposite of a negative 7 is a positive 7. So negative 7 plus 7 is equal to 0. That's what the additive inverse is. So when we're talking about the multiplicative identity, it's sort of like the additive identity when we ask the same question, what can you multiply a number by to get the exact same number? So what can you multiply 12 by to get 12? Well, the answer is 1. The multiplicative identity basically states that if you take a number and you multiply it by 1, you're going to get that exact same number again. So 18 times 1 is equal to 18. 2 times 1 is equal to 2. The multiplicative property of 0 basically means any number multiplied by 0 is always going to be equal to 0. So for example, 1 times 0 equal to 0. 6 times 0 is equal to 0. 17,842 times 0 is equal to 0. The multiplicative inverse states if you multiply any number by its reciprocal, it equals 1. So you have to remember, what is a reciprocal? So a reciprocal, let's just say that we have the number 4/5. The reciprocal is basically where you flip the denominator with the numerator. So the reciprocal of 4/5 is 5/4. So if you multiply these together, when you're multiplying fractions, remember you always go straight across. Multiply straight across, so 4 times 5, and then 5 times 4. So 4 times 5 is 20, and 5 times 4 is 20, and 20 divided by 20, that's always equal to 1. And again, for another example, let's see if we have 5, just the number 5. What is the reciprocal of 5? Now remember, if you want to write the number 5 as a fraction, you can also write it as 5 over 1. So what's the reciprocal of 5 over 1? That's 1 over 5. So when you multiply straight across, 5 times 1 is 5, 1 times 5 is 5, 5 divided by 5 is equal to 1. and that is the multiplicative inverse. The commutative property is a property which you will be tested on later on when it comes to Terra Nova. They love to test this property. So this is very important. So the order in which you add or multiply does not change the sum or product. So for example, if you multiply 6 times 1, that is going to be the exact same as 1 times 6. 5 plus 2 is the exact same thing as 2 plus 5. 7 plus 3 is the exact same thing as 3 plus 7. This is the commutative property. It's basically where the numbers flip. Just a warning, the commutative property is only for addition and multiplication. It does not work for subtraction and division. So the associative property is another important property that goes along with the commutative property. The associative property basically states the way that you group 3 or more numbers in addition or multiplication does not change the answer. The associative property deals with parentheses. So for example, if you have 1 plus and then parentheses 2 plus 3, that is also equal to, if you just move the parentheses, 1 plus 2 plus 3. If you work it out using the order of operations, you're going to get the exact same answer every time. Now if you do the same thing with multiplication, 1 times, and open the parentheses, 2 times 3, that is also equal to, if you just move the parentheses, 1 times 2 times 3. If you do the order of operations on the left side of the equal sign, you do the parentheses first, so you have 2 times 3, which is equal to 6, 6 times 1, which is also equal to 6. So you can move over to the right side, 1 times 2 is equal to 2. And then you would do 2 times 3, which would equal to 6. So 6 is equal to 6. So the associative property deals with parentheses up here. Just a reminder, the associative property deals with parentheses. This also does not work for subtraction and division.